Hi, this is a simulation of the startup systems for our scenario in basic power plant simulation. We're going to start up the M11MAK auxiliary systems. So where we're starting out, just so we can summarize, is we've just started out. We have our electric power plant running essentially in an emergency situation. So we have our emergency generator running. Unfortunately, what we're trying to get to is operating some of the other main systems on the ship. So we don't have power that's supplied to any of the other kind of major consumers on the ship. So we have just a few systems that we can run. What we're trying to do is start up a diesel generator so that we can provide power to the rest of the ship. So our first goal is to get the diesel generator started. So we're going to concentrate on diesel generator number one. You can see at the side of the screen I've set up our instruction sheet, so we're just going to work through our instruction sheet. That's our best strategy for getting this started. So first thing, start air. We're going to check our start air supply and ensure that we have enough pressure to start. We need a minimum of 15 bar as our start air, and we do have enough. So DG cooling water system, I've got two valves to open, my inlet valve and my outlet valve. I'm going to set my temperature controller to manual, and for the first startup we'll just set it to 100% open. Check my expansion tank level. Looks like it's okay. I don't need to refill anything. Next, what we have is our fuel system. So just like the same pattern as we did here, what we're going to do is we're going to start from some reservoir, pass through, create a complete pathway, go through a pump, do our function, and then return back to our starting point. So we want to do the same thing when we start up our fuel system. So our fuel system's over here. It appears that maybe it starts over here, but actually it does not. So what we want to do is backtrack all the way back to our reservoir. So if we go back to page 3, what we can see is we have our DO service tank here on the right hand side. This is our starting point. Flows leave to the right, so we're passing through this way. We have a valve to open up to get to DG1. Got a valve here. This pump will come on automatically with the diesel generator. We'll open up one of our filters and we can return back all the way back to our tank. So we've created a complete recirculation loop, and we've now set up our fuel system. Whenever we have double filters, and often when we have double pumps, these guys are here as redundancy, so we don't want to open up both. What we're going to use is only one, and the other one would be there as a backup so we can switch over on the fly. So if one filter gets plugged, we can switch over to the other without having to stop the piece of equipment. Okay, lube oil system. So again, ask you guys to work away at some instructions on your own. But what we're going to do is, first of all, start out at our reservoir, ensure that we have some oil available. If we're low, what we could do is we could add some oil. If we're too high, we could drain some oil. But we'll bring it up to maybe around the 50% mark. We'll follow through our pathway. So I'm going to come up through, I'm going to go through one of my filters, and that will return me down. I have a pump that I can use to circulate fluid, and I'm going to have it in manual mode, and during the initial startup I'm going to pre-prime my lube oil system by turning on that pump. You can see I have some flow and pressure moving through the system. I'm up about 50% from my level, so I'm going to make sure that I close off that fill valve. So I have water system ready, I have lube oil system ready, I have my fuel system ready, I have air pressure going to the starter, so I am okay to start this generator. So I'm going to start it. And what I want to do is just note that I have stabilized at my set point speed, so around 1200 RPM is what this engine is running at. I have fuel that's going in, I have air that's coming in, I have circulation of cooling water, and I have lube oil pressure and flow. So a couple things just to finish up here. What I want to do is I want to switch over my temperature controller into auto, and we'll have our set point as 65 degrees. So this is going to control what temperature the cooling water is that goes through the engine. The other thing I want to do is set my lube oil pump to auto. So this electric pump will come on or off as I need to. Okay, so at this point, what I have is my diesel generator up and running. The engine is operational. Typically, before putting a heavy load on it, what I would do is allow it to warm up. So bring the coolant up to temperature, the lube oil up to temperature. Everything's fairly cold right now. We're just going to skip that step at this point and jump ahead to connecting it to the electrical system. So the electric power plant is on page 70. What I have is a number of different spots where I can supply power. This is my diesel generator 1, which is operational, and it connects through, and I have an electrical breaker. So this is showing the flow of, or pathway of electricity. In order to connect it in this ship, I'm connecting in my breaker, and now I'm energizing what we consider or call this main bus bar. That's my main distribution pathway for electricity, and that bus bar is represented as well on my electrical consumers page. So again, that same bus bar that is being fed by my diesel generator 1. I have a number of breakers that I'm going to turn on. At this point, we'll just turn everything on, so if we do need something, it will have power available to it. And you can see that now my diesel generator is allowed to supply power to all of the different systems on the ship. The emergency generator that was on now has disconnected itself electrically and turned itself off. It will come back on if it needs to. Okay, so our next task, if we're going to eventually get our boiler running, is that, say on our boiler, what we're going to need is going to be a few things. So fuel and pumps, we've kind of been able to get ourselves organized for that. We have electricity. Our fuel system seems to be operational. One of the big things that we're going to need is be able to control the water coming in and out of the boiler. So in order for this boiler to operate safely, what we need to have is the right amount of water inside of the system. In order to do that, what I'm going to need to use is this control valve just past these pumps, and that control valve is going to need air pressure in order to operate. air pressure is going to be created and distributed through page 6060, the start air and air compressor page. So we'll go over there. In terms of what we need to accomplish on this page, let me make some notes here. So here's our air compressor page. Control air over here is where those control valves are fed. So in order to get air across, what we want to do is we want to start from our service air compressor, and we are going to make our pathway across through here. Really what you have on the ship is you have two different air systems. So there is essentially two different systems that you have here. You have up here, which is your start air, and you have down below, which is your service air. Your start air is a high pressure, but we would consider it to be a dirty system. The service air is going to be a low pressure, but we would consider it to be a clean system. So we want to keep them separated. You have this makeup valve which you can use in order to drive air down from your start air system and into your service tank, but we would only want to use that as an emergency type use because we don't want to contaminate our clean system with our dirty system. So our goal is to use this air compression system at the bottom, and we've set up our service air compressor so that it will turn on. We have electricity going to it from the diesel generator. What we also need to get set up though is our system here. So we have this green system, which is our cooling water system. So we've got this loop that we need to create for cooling water. So before we get our air compressors going, what we want to do is make sure that we have air or water that's available for cooling. So let's go through those steps. We're going to concentrate on the water side, then we're going to concentrate on the service air side, and then I'll show you how to automate your compressors so that they turn on and off automatically to keep your tanks full. Okay, so we're back to the simulation. So what we want to do is we want to get our systems up and operational. So I'm going to open up my water valve here, and we can take a second to see, is that actually doing its function? So I open up that valve, and if I look at what's happening, what I'm going to do is monitor my flows. So even though I opened up that valve, I have no flow. Tells me that I have a problem. If I follow through, my flow's coming in here, moving across, up, and then through. It appears that everything's okay on this page, and that's going to trigger in my mind that I have a problem on page 9. So let's go over there and try to make sense of this system. So I have my main seawater system. I just came from page 60, and there's the indication for 60. So really, those loops that occurred are the loops through this box. So I have an in into the box, and then I have an out. And that corresponds to my in and my out. So in order to get this system going, what I have to do is create a complete path through my reservoir. So my water is picked up through here, and essentially what I'm looking at is one entire, say the hull of the ship in this case, and what I have is an outlet into that reservoir. So I need to make a complete path from here to here. And so how I do that is I've got an inlet valve. It's going to go through a filter. I've got a valve to get into my air compression system. And then I've got a discharge valve. I can turn on a pump in order to activate this system, and what we should see is I'm now starting to get some flow and building pressure. Flow is now starting to go through my air compressors. If I go to this page, what I can see is that now I do have some water flow. I'll complete my pathway across, which will open up delivery to the control air system, and I can turn on my service air compressor. You can see it's sending air through the system. It's building pressure inside of this tank, and some of it is going to my control air system. I noticed in class probably at least half of the students opened up all of these drains, and we got to think, why are we trying to open up all these drains? Part of what we're doing when we're operating those compressors is we're trying to fill up tanks and store some compressed air. By opening up drains, what we're doing is we're allowing all that air to just pour out through openings. The drains are there as over time, some of these guys will collect some drops of moisture in the bottom, so from time to time in the plant we will open them up and blow out a bit of air in order to remove any water that's collecting in the bottom of tanks. But these guys are not ever to be opened on a regular or an ongoing basis inside of the system. So it appears I have my service air compressor set up and operational. I'm building pressure to my control air. So the last thing that I'm going to do is just automate the system. So right now, nothing's going to tell this air compressor to turn off automatically. So eventually what it'll do is start overfilling this tank, which will drive a few alarms in terms of pressure, but it will also eventually cause my safety relief valve to go off inside of my tank. And if you're ever in the case where your service tank or your tanks are getting overfilled, a lot of the reaction from students is to open up drains or open up other components, but that's not solving your problem. Your problem is caused because you're overfilling it. So your best choice is to turn off your air compressor and stop it from overfilling. And that buys you time to make choices, but it also stops the filling process immediately. This tank, it sits about 7.5 bar for its pressure, so we still got a little ways to go. Where you can automate this system is if you go to page 102, the pump and compressor control. You can see over on the side here, I have my air compressors. So I have a service air compressor. Right now it's showing that it is on. And I could turn that guy into auto mode now. Got to be really careful when you're putting it into auto mode that everything is working right. So you want to make sure you do have a correct pathway, you haven't left any drains open, and you do have cooling water, because right now you're relinquishing control over this device. The other idea is that now that I have it in auto mode, I'm not allowed to touch this on-off button anymore, because then I'm going to be fighting with the control system, and it's going to have real issues if it's doing something that it's not expecting. So it's not expecting for anybody to come and turn this on and off. It's expecting to make those decisions. So at this point with this guy, I'm hands off. If you want to at this point, you could also set up your other air compressors, so we could use Start Air 1 or Start Air 2 in order to fill up our other tanks. So if we follow through our same routine, we've got a pathway, comes up and say I want to fill up my Start Air 1 tank, which is the tank that I'm using for my diesel generator. I would also need to turn on my cooling water supply to that system. And if I go to my Start Air Compressor 1, I could turn this guy into auto. So when I do that, what we'll see is that the control system now is taking charge of that compressor. So it is filling up this tank. When it gets to approximately 30 bar, which is its cutoff point, it will automatically turn itself off. I'll let the video run for about a minute, and you can see the automatic starting and stopping of those compressors. So the one just stopped, and the other one will stop shortly. At this point, we're ready to start up our boiler and start tackling those pieces of equipment, and that'll be our next step once we've mastered starting up some of the auxiliary systems.